The matron's teacup shattered against the parlor floor at the exact moment. Fenna Calloway's laugh rang out like a church bell across the crowded room, and the sound of her joy was so pure and uncontained that every head turned to witness the large orc woman doubled over. Her green hand pressed to her mouth too late to stop the next wave of laughter from escaping. Ethan Morrison had been watching the serving boy's increasingly precarious balancing act for the past 5 minutes. A tower of sandwiches wobbling on a tray held by arms too young and nervous for the weight. When gravity finally won and cucumber slices went flying in every direction, one landing perfectly atop the matron's elaborate hat, Ethan had barely managed to contain his own laughter. But Fenna had not contained hers. She had let it out full and glorious, a rolling cascade of genuine delight that filled every corner of the stuffy parlor. "Miss Calloway." The matron's voice cut through the room like a blade through butter. "Your laugh is far too loud for a lady. This is a respectable gathering, not a tavern brawl." The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Fenna's face went a darker shade of green, her small tusks barely visible as she pressed her lips together hard. Her pointed ears drooped slightly. She was tall, yes, but not unusually so. Her build was athletic and strong without being massive, her features distinctly feminine despite the greenish cast to her skin. She wore a simple blue dress that someone had clearly helped her select, something meant to make her look more human, more acceptable, more quiet. Ethan watched her fold in on herself, making her body smaller, her presence less. Something hot and angry flared in his chest. He set down his own teacup with deliberate care and crossed the room to where Fenna stood. "I thought it was the best sound I've heard all week," he said clearly, loud enough for the matron to hear. "A good honest laugh is worth 10 polite smiles." Fenna looked up at him with wide amber eyes. She was perhaps an inch shorter than his own 6 feet, and up close he could see the mortification still burning in her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible, "but I should not have been so loud." "Why not?" He kept his voice gentle now, meant only for her. "The boy's accident was funny. You laughed. That seems reasonable to me." She shook her head slightly, glancing toward where her mother sat ramrod straight in a corner chair, looking as though she wished to sink through the floor. "This is a betrothal viewing," Fenna murmured. "I am supposed to be making a good impression, being ladylike." Ethan had known what the gathering was, of course. Half the eligible young people from 3 Valleys had been crammed into the Weatherby parlor under the thin pretense of a social call. The orc families who had settled in the border territories sent their daughters. The human families sent their sons. Everyone pretended it was all very casual while the mothers evaluated bloodlines and the fathers calculated land holdings. He had come because his own mother had begged him, worried that at 26 he was getting too old to be unmarried and too stubborn to find someone on his own. He had expected to endure an afternoon of stiff conversation and weak tea. He had not expected Fenna's laugh. "You did make an impression," he told her. "Just perhaps not the one they wanted." The ghost of a smile tugged at her mouth before she suppressed it. "No, definitely not that one." The matron was still glaring at them both, and other conversations had resumed in nervous whispers. The serving boy had fled to the kitchen. Someone had removed the cucumber slice from the hat. "I am Ethan Morrison," he said, offering a small bow. "I build houses and furniture, nothing fancy but solid work. Fenna Calloway." She returned the gesture awkwardly, as though she had been practicing but still had not quite gotten it right. "I help my father with his orchard. Apple trees, mostly. Some pears." "I like apples," Ethan said, and then felt immediately foolish because what else could he possibly say to that? He did like apples. It was not a lie. It was simply perhaps the least interesting thing he could have offered, but Fenna's smile broke through despite her obvious attempts to remain demure. "Most people do," she said. "They are fairly popular." They stood there in the middle of the parlor while the social machinery of the betrothal viewing ground on around them. Ethan knew he should say something charming, something that would make her want to see him again. He was not bad with words, generally. He could talk to clients about measurements and materials, could negotiate prices, could tell stories at the tavern that made people laugh. But standing in front of Fenna with her amber eyes and her carefully suppressed joy, his mind went blank of everything except the desire to hear that laugh again. "Would you like to walk in the garden?" he asked finally. "I think there are meant to be refreshments outside." Relief washed visibly across her face. "Yes, please." They escaped through the side door into a garden that was trying very hard to look elegant despite the stubborn frontier soil. Other couples had scattered among the hedges, chaperoned at a distance by watchful mothers. Ethan led Fenna toward a stone bench near a struggling rose bush. "I truly am sorry," she said once they were seated. "About laughing like that. My mother told me I needed to be quieter, more controlled. She said human men do not want wives who draw attention." "Your mother is wrong," Ethan said bluntly. "Or at least, she is wrong about what all human men want. I cannot speak for the rest of them, but I know what I heard in that parlor, and it was not something that should be apologized for." Fenna twisted her hands in her lap. "You are kind to say so. But you saw how they looked at me, like I had done something shameful." "They looked at you because they are scared of anything that does not fit into their narrow idea of proper," Ethan said. The anger from earlier had not quite faded, "and because they are fools." She glanced at him sideways, and he saw calculation there alongside the lingering embarrassment. "You do not have to say these things just to be polite. I know how these viewings work. The human men come because their families pressure them, and they look at us orc women like we are livestock they are considering purchasing. Most of them will go home and tell their mothers there was no one suitable, and they will mean there was no one human enough." Ethan could not argue with that. He had seen the dismissive looks, the way several of the other men had barely glanced at the orc women before clustering together to discuss farming and weather. "Yes," he said, "that is probably true for some of them, but I am not here evaluating livestock. I am here because my mother worries, and I am a poor enough son that I let her worry less important than my own stubborn independence. And now, I am sitting in a garden with you because I wanted to tell you that your laugh was the only genuine thing that happened in that entire cursed parlor." Fenna was quiet for a long moment. A breeze rustled through the struggling garden. Somewhere nearby, another couple was having an awkward conversation about butter churns. "It is genuine," she said finally, so softly he almost missed it. "The laugh, I mean, I have always laughed like that. Loud. My mother says I sound like a braying donkey, but she says it with love, mostly. My father says I get it from his side of the family. His mother apparently laughed so hard at her own wedding that she knocked over the ceremonial candles. I would have liked to meet her," Ethan said. "She died before I was born, but people still tell stories." Fenna's expression had softened, the tight control easing. "She was never proper either, according to the tales. She wore trousers and climbed trees and once punched a human merchant who tried to cheat my grandfather." "She sounds magnificent." "My mother is terrified I will turn out the same way," Fenna admitted. "That I will never find a husband because I cannot be the quiet, delicate thing that human society wants women to be. She thinks if I just try harder, smile softer, laugh quieter, someone will overlook the green skin and the tusks and see a proper lady." Ethan shook his head. "If someone needs you to be quiet before they can see your worth, they do not deserve to hear you laugh at all." Fenna turned to look at him fully then, her amber eyes searching his face. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that. You are a strange man, Ethan Morrison." He smiled despite the overused phrase because on her lips it sounded like wondering rather than dismissal. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I just know what matters. Good work, good food, good laughter. The rest is just decoration." They sat together on that stone bench until Fenna's mother came to collect her, shooting Ethan a look that he could not quite decipher. Hope, maybe, mixed with worry. Fenna stood and smoothed her skirts and became small and careful again. But before she left, she looked back at him once. "Thank you," she said, "for the walk and for the other thing. The other thing making me feel less foolish." "You were never foolish," Ethan said. "Not even for a moment." He watched her go, her mother's hand on her elbow, guiding her back toward the parlor where the betrothal viewing was winding down into a series of polite goodbyes that meant nothing. His own mother found him a few minutes later. "Well," she asked, trying and failing to sound casual. "Did you meet anyone interesting?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I did." His mother waited for elaboration, but he did not offer any. He was too busy thinking about acoustics. Ethan had always understood buildings the way some people understood music or mathematics. He knew how weight distributed, how wood aged, how different joints held under different stresses. He had apprenticed with a master carpenter for 8 years before setting up his own small operation. And in the 5 years since, he had built a reputation for solid, dependable work. Houses that did not leak, furniture that did not wobble, nothing fancy but nothing that fell apart either. He did not build follies or luxuries. He could not afford to. The margins on carpentry work were thin, and he had been saving every spare coin trying to build up enough capital to expand his operation, maybe take on an apprentice of his own, maybe buy better tools. He lived modestly in a small room above his workshop, ate simply, and kept his expenses low. But that night, lying awake on his narrow bed, he thought about Fenna's laugh and about acoustics, and about a wild idea that made absolutely no financial sense whatsoever. In the morning, he went to see his land. He owned a piece of hillside about 2 miles from the town center, 5 acres of rocky soil and scrub brush that he had bought 3 years ago for almost nothing because no one else wanted it. Too steep for farming, too far from the road for a shop, too exposed to the wind for comfortable living. He had bought it anyway because he had a carpenter's eye for potential, and the view from the top of that hill was something rare and beautiful. On clear days, you could see 3 valleys and the mountain range beyond. He had thought someday, when he had money, he might build a small house there for himself. Something simple. Somewhere to grow old. He stood at the summit now, wind whipping through his hair, and reconsidered everything. The acoustics of a space depended on shape and material and volume. A small room with low ceilings and soft furnishings swallowed sound. A large room with high ceilings and hard surfaces threw it back. Cathedrals were designed to make a single voice fill the space with resonance. Concert halls were shaped to carry music to every seat. What would it take to build a house that echoed? Ethan spent the next week sketching. He filled page after page with rough drawings, calculating volumes and angles. He drew vaulted ceilings that rose 2 stories high. He drew a great central hall with a gallery running around the 2nd floor. He drew windows placed to let in light without breaking the acoustic space. He drew arches and columns that would support the weight while leaving the interior open and resonant. It was madness. It was expensive madness. The materials alone would cost more than he had saved. The labor would take months, maybe longer, and he would have to do most of it himself because he could not afford to hire help. Every hour spent building this impossible house would be an hour not spent on paying work. He sketched anyway. His friend Marcus found him in the workshop one evening, surrounded by drawings and calculations, and let out a low whistle. "What are you planning, a cathedral, a house?" Ethan said. Marcus picked up one of the sketches, studied it. "A house for who? A duke, for me, eventually." It was not quite a lie. He did plan to live there, assuming he did not go bankrupt and lose everything first. "Ethan." Marcus set the drawing down carefully. "This is beautiful work, truly, but this is not a carpenter's cottage. This is something grand. Do you have a commission I do not know about?" "No commission." "Then how are you going to pay for it?" That was the question, was it not? Ethan had run the numbers a dozen times, and they did not get better with repetition. He had savings, yes, but not enough. He would need to take out a loan, mortgage the land itself, and probably his workshop too. And even then, it would be close. Too close. If anything went wrong, if the work took longer than expected, or materials cost more than estimated, or if he could not keep up with his regular commissions, he would drown in debt. "I will figure it out," he said, which was not an answer. Marcus gave him a long, measuring look. "This is about a woman, is it not?" "No, Ethan, maybe, partly." He sighed and set down his pencil. "I met someone at that ridiculous betrothal viewing, and I want to give her something. Not because I think I can buy her affection, but because she deserves to have something built just for her. Something that says who she is matters more than who people think she should be. And you are going to say this with architecture?" "Yes." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then laughed, not mockingly but with genuine amusement. "You are either the most romantic fool I have ever met or the worst businessman, possibly both." "Probably both," Ethan agreed. "Does she know about this plan?" "No, and I am not going to tell her, not until it is finished." "What if she does not feel the same way about you?" It was a fair question. Ethan had seen Fenna exactly once, had spoken to her for perhaps 20 minutes total. He had no idea if she thought about him at all. For all he knew, she had gone home and forgotten his name by the next morning. But he remembered her laugh, and the way it had been smothered, and the look on her face when she had made herself small and quiet and acceptable. "Then I will have built a very strange house for myself," Ethan said. "And I will live in it alone and listen to my own echoes and feel foolish. But at least I will have tried." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You are definitely a fool, but I suppose there are worse things to be." He left, and Ethan returned to his sketches. By midnight he had a plan. By morning, he had talked himself into it, despite every piece of common sense screaming at him to stop. He went to the bank the next day and took out a loan that made his hands shake when he signed the papers. Then he went to the lumber yard and started buying materials. The foundation took 3 weeks to lay. Ethan hired 2 laborers to help with the heavy work of hauling stone up the hillside and mixing mortar. He could not afford to pay them well, but he paid them fairly, and they were good workers who did not ask too many questions about why he was building a great hall on a hillside in the middle of nowhere. Word spread anyway. Small towns were like that. People noticed when someone did something unusual, and Ethan's project was definitely unusual. Folks started riding out to the hillside to see what he was doing. Some offered advice. Some offered criticism. Most just shook their heads and wondered what had gotten into the sensible Morrison boy. Ethan ignored them and kept building. The walls went up next, slow and steady. He used good timber, properly seasoned, joined with care. He built forms for the arches and poured them with concrete mixed with local stone for strength. Every piece had to be right, had to be solid, because this building needed to last. He was working on the frame for the first of the vaulted ceiling sections when he looked up one afternoon and saw Fenna standing at the edge of the construction site. His heart did something complicated in his chest. He had not seen her since the betrothal viewing 6 weeks ago. He had thought about her constantly, had built every wall with her in mind, but he had not actually expected her to appear. She wore work clothes now, practical trousers and a loose shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a braid. She looked much more comfortable than she had in the blue dress, more herself. "Hello," he called down from the scaffolding. "Give me a moment." He climbed down, brushing sawdust from his clothes. Fenna watched him with an expression he could not quite read. "I heard you were building something up here," she said when he reached the ground. "I was curious. People have been talking then. People always talk, especially in small towns. Especially when someone does something interesting." She looked past him at the rising structure, at the skeleton of arches and the platforms that would become the gallery. "What is this going to be? A house?" Ethan said. "It is very large for a house." "Yes, and it has a strange shape." "All those high ceilings and open spaces." "Yes." Fenna turned her amber eyes back to him. Why, he could not tell her, not yet. It was too soon, too presumptuous, too likely to sound like madness. "I wanted to try something different," he said instead, which was true even if it was not the whole truth. "Most of my work is standard. Houses that look like every other house. Furniture that looks like every other furniture. I wanted to build something unique." She nodded slowly, still studying the structure. "Can I see inside?" "There is not much inside yet, just framing and scaffolding. I still want to see." He led her through what would eventually be the main entrance, stepping carefully over lumber and tools. The interior was all bones right now, the skeleton of the great hall rising around them. The floor was still dirt and sawdust. The walls were bare studs. But the shape was there, the promise of the space. Fenna tipped her head back, looking up at the arches that would support the ceiling. "How tall will it be?" 20 feet at the peak of the central vault. The gallery will be at 10 feet, running around 3 sides. "Why so high?" "Because sound needs space to travel. Because a laugh that big deserves a room to match. Because I want to give you a place where you never have to make yourself small." "I like the proportions," he said aloud. Fenna walked slowly through the space, her boots scuffing in the sawdust. She ran her hand along one of the vertical supports, testing its strength. She stood in the center of what would be the hall and turned in a slow circle. Then she clapped her hands once, sharp and sudden. The sound bounced back from the framing, not quite an echo yet but the ghost of one, a suggestion of what the space would become. Her face lit up. "Oh." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. She clapped again, then stamped her foot. The sounds came back, muted and distorted but present. "It is going to echo. That is the idea. Why would you want a house that echoes?" But there was curiosity in her voice now, not criticism. Ethan chose his words carefully. "I think sound is important. The way a space holds it or releases it or throws it back. Most houses swallow sound, make everything quiet and muffled. I wanted to build something that would let sound live, let it resonate." Fenna was watching him intently. "That is unusual. Yes, and possibly wonderful." His heart did that complicated thing again. "You think so?" "I do." She walked to another part of the hall and clapped again, listening to the way the echo differed from a different position. "I have never been in a building like this." "Well, except the church in the next town over, but that is a church. This is meant to be a home." "It is meant to be both, maybe. A home that celebrates sound instead of suppressing it." She looked at him then with an expression that was equal parts confusion and something that might have been hope. "Ethan Morrison, you are full of surprises. Is that good or bad? I have not decided yet." But she was smiling. "Can I come back to see how it progresses?" He should have said no. Should have kept the project secret until it was finished, maintained the surprise. But he found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "Yes, you can come back whenever you want. Even if it is often, especially if it is often." She stayed for another hour, asking questions about the construction, listening to him explain the different joints and techniques. She was easy to talk to, genuinely interested rather than politely feigning attention. When she finally left, the sun was setting behind the western ridge, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber that matched her eyes. Ethan stood in the skeleton of his echoing house and admitted to himself that he was in serious trouble. Not just financial trouble, though that was real and growing, but the other kind of trouble, the kind where your heart decided to belong to someone before you had any confirmation that they wanted it. He went back to work. Fenna came back 3 days later, then 5 days after that. Then she started coming every week, bringing lunch sometimes, staying to watch him work. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about the orchard, about the particular challenges of growing fruit on the frontier, about her father's patient experiments with cross-breeding different apple varieties. He told her about carpentry, about wood grain and joinery, about the satisfaction of creating something solid and lasting. She tested the acoustics at every stage. When he finished the floor, she walked across it barefoot to hear the sound of her steps on the polished wood. When he completed the first section of gallery, she stood on it and sang a single clear note that hung in the air like a bell. When he installed the first of the windows, she stood in the light they cast and clapped her hands and laughed at the way the sound was already starting to resonate. But she did not laugh the way she had in the parlor. She laughed quietly, carefully, the way someone laughs when they have learned to take up less space. Summer turned toward autumn. The walls were complete now, the roof mostly on, the windows installed. The interior was taking shape, the gallery railings finished, the great hall's proportions finally visible in 3 dimensions rather than just sketches. It was beautiful, Ethan thought, better than he had imagined. The light came through the tall windows and pooled on the floor in golden rectangles. The arches soared overhead with a grace that made the engineering look effortless even though it had been anything but, and the acoustics were developing exactly as he had hoped. Every sound in the hall had presence, weight, duration. Footsteps rang like drumbeats, voices carried and bloomed. Even breathing sounded more alive. Fenna came every week without fail now. She brought her lunch and ate sitting on the gallery railing, feet dangling. She helped sometimes, holding boards while he cut them, fetching tools, sweeping up sawdust. She did not need to help. He had not asked her to. But she seemed to enjoy being part of the creation, and he certainly enjoyed having her there. They did not talk about courtship. They did not define what they were to each other. Ethan did not ask if he could call on her formally, and she did not ask what his intentions were. They existed in a strange, suspended space, building something together without acknowledging what they were building beyond the literal walls and arches. But Ethan was going broke, and that was harder to ignore. The loan payments were crushing. He had budgeted carefully, but materials had cost more than expected. The specialized work on the arches had taken longer than planned. He had been forced to turn down several commissions because he did not have time to take them on while also working on the house. His savings were gone. He was behind on payments to the lumber yard. The bank was starting to send letters. Marcus confronted him in the workshop one evening in late autumn. "You need to stop. I am almost finished. You are almost bankrupt. Do you know what people are saying? That you have lost your mind. That you are building a folly that will never be worth what you are spending on it. That you will lose everything. I know what people are saying. And you do not care." Ethan set down the chisel he had been sharpening. "I care, but I am too far in to stop now. If I stop, then I definitely lose everything. At least if I finish, there is a chance it will be worth something." "A chance," Marcus repeated. "You are betting your entire livelihood on a chance." "Yes, because of a woman who may not even want you. That hit harder than it should have. I am not doing this to buy her affection. Then, why are you doing it? Because she should have a place where she can laugh without apology. Because the world told her to be quiet, and I want to build her something that demands sound. Because I heard her joy once, and I want to hear it again, amplified and glorified and thrown back from walls built specifically to hold it. Because it matters, Ethan said. Because some things are worth doing even if they do not make financial sense. Because I am a fool, like you said, and this is the foolish thing I have chosen to do, Marcus sighed. At least let me help. I can loan you enough to cover the next payment to the bank. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering. You are my friend, and I am not going to stand by and watch you drown without throwing you a rope. Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Thank you. Finish it fast, Marcus advised, before the winter makes construction impossible. And then figure out what you are going to do with a giant echoing house in the middle of nowhere. That was the question, was it not? Ethan had been so focused on building the space that he had not fully thought through what came after. He could not afford to simply live in it, not with the debt he had accumulated. He would need to find some way to make it pay, to justify the expense, to keep the bank from foreclosing. But first, he needed to finish. He worked through autumn and into early winter, racing against the weather. The interior details were the most time-consuming, the railings carved and sanded, the floors finished to a mirror shine, the walls plastered smooth. He built a massive fireplace in the north wall, sized to heat the whole great hall. He installed iron sconces for candles. He crafted a front door from oak, heavy and solid, with a threshold worn smooth. Fenna came less often as the weather turned cold, but she still came. She brought apple cider and fresh bread. She sat in the gallery wrapped in a heavy cloak and watched him work. They talked less now, but the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. One afternoon in late autumn she asked, "Who is this house for?" Ethan was up on a ladder installing the last of the sconces. His hands paused. "What do you mean?" "You said you were building it for yourself, but this is not a house for one person. It is too large, too grand. It is a house for gatherings, for people, for celebrations. So who is it really for?" He could not look at her. If he looked at her, he would tell her everything, and he was not ready. The house was not finished. His finances were a disaster. He had nothing to offer except debt and a bizarre building that might or might not be worth anything to anyone. "I am not sure yet," he said, which was both true and false. "I suppose I will figure that out when it is done." She was quiet for a long moment. "Will you tell me, when you figure it out?" "Yes." She left soon after, and Ethan sat on the ladder and stared at the sconce in his hands and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Winter closed in. The first snow fell in early December, dusting the hillside and the house in white. Ethan worked inside now, finishing the last details. The construction was essentially complete. What remained was decoration, furniture, the small touches that would make it feel like a home rather than just a shell. He had no money left for furniture. His workshop was mortgaged. The bank was making threatening noises about foreclosure. He had exactly enough saved to make one more payment, and then he would be out of options. He sat in the great hall on Christmas Eve alone and listened to the silence. Even silence echoed here. The room was so perfectly designed to hold sound that the absence of it felt like a presence, like something waiting to be filled. He thought about Fenna's laugh and wondered if he would ever hear it again. Then someone knocked on the door. He opened it to find Fenna standing on his threshold, snowflakes caught in her hair, a basket over one arm. "Hello," she said. "I thought you might be here. I am here, and alone on Christmas Eve." "Yes," she held up the basket. I brought food, too much food, really. My mother cooked enough for an army, and I thought, well, Ethan is probably up in that strange house of his, not eating properly. So I brought some. He stepped aside to let her in. She entered the great hall and stopped, turning in a slow circle to take in the completed space. The fireplace was lit, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The polished floors gleamed. The gallery railings caught the firelight and glowed warm. "You finished it," she said quietly. "Mostly. There is still furniture to make and some small details, but the construction is done." She set the basket down and walked to the center of the hall. She stamped her foot, and the sound rang out clear and sharp, bouncing from the vaults, returning from the gallery, echoing in layers. "It works," she said, wonder in her voice. "It really works. The echo is perfect." "Try something else," Ethan said. She clapped her hands, and the sound cascaded around them. She sang a note, and it hung in the air like light. She spoke her own name, and it came back to her from every direction. And then she laughed, not the careful, controlled laugh she had learned to use. Not the quiet chuckle that took up no space, but the real laugh, the huge, rolling, glorious laugh that had first caught his attention in the parlor. The laugh that was too loud for a lady. It filled the hall like music. It bounced from the ceiling and rang from the walls. It layered and harmonized with itself, her single laugh becoming a chorus. The acoustics took her joy and amplified it, threw it back to her, made it bigger and richer and more present. She laughed until she had to bend over, hands on her knees, and even then the hall kept laughing with her, holding the sound, sustaining it, making it last. When the echoes finally faded, she straightened up, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "You built this for me," she said. It was not a question. Ethan stood by the fireplace, his heart in his throat. "Yes, the whole house, the echoing, all of it. Yes, because I laughed too loud. Because you laughed perfectly," he corrected. "And someone told you it was wrong. And I wanted to build you a place where it would be right, where it would be celebrated, where your laugh could be as big as it wanted to be." Fenna crossed the space between them. She was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. "You ridiculous man. This is the most absurd, wonderful, impossible thing anyone has ever done. Is that good or bad?" His voice came out rough. "It is good, you absolute fool. It is so good I do not even have words for how good it is." She reached up and took his face in her hands, her palms warm against his cheeks. "I have been falling in love with you for months. Every time I came here and you explained another detail, another reason why you shaped the room just so, another acoustic principle. I knew you were building something special, but I did not know it was for me." "It was always for you," Ethan said. "From the first moment I heard you laugh, I wanted to give you this, a place where you could be loud and joyful and completely yourself. And you went broke doing it." He blinked. "How did you know? Everyone knows. Small town, remember, people talk. And I have been watching you get thinner and more worried even while you kept building." Her expression turned serious. "Ethan Morrison, please tell me you did not destroy your life for this." "I may have damaged it significantly," he admitted. "I mortgaged everything. The land, the workshop. I am behind on payments. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I have been trying to figure out what to do, how to make this place pay for itself somehow, but I have not found an answer yet." "What if someone wanted to use it?" Fenna asked slowly. "Use it for what? Gatherings? Celebrations? Music?" Her amber eyes were bright with sudden excitement. "These acoustics are extraordinary. Musicians would pay to perform in a space like this. People would pay to hold weddings here, festivals, dances. This is not just a house. It is a hall, a gathering place." Ethan stared at her. The idea was so obvious in retrospect that he felt foolish for not thinking of it himself. "Do you really think people would come?" "I know they would. Let me prove it to you." She pulled away from him and went to the basket she had brought, rummaging through it until she found what she was looking for: a small wooden whistle. "My brother is a musician. He plays at the tavern sometimes. If I can get him to come hear these acoustics, he will spread the word faster than anything. It is Christmas Eve. He will come for his sister on Christmas Eve, especially if I tell him it is important." She was already moving toward the door. "Wait here. I will be back within the hour." She was gone before he could protest, leaving him alone in the echoing hall with a basket of food and a growing sense of disbelieving hope. True to her word, she returned within the hour. She brought her brother, a lanky orc man named Finn who carried a fiddle case and looked deeply skeptical. She also brought her mother and father, who looked even more skeptical, and Marcus, who must have been intercepted along the way and wore an expression of barely suppressed amusement. "Well," Finn said, standing in the middle of the hall, "this is certainly something." "Play," Fenna urged. "Just try it." Her brother shrugged and took out his fiddle. He tuned it briefly, the sound of the strings bright and clear in the space. Then he drew the bow across and played a simple scale. The notes bloomed like flowers, each one clear and distinct, sustained and supported by the acoustics, blending into a richness that made the simple scale sound like a composition. Finn stopped mid-scale, his eyes wide. "Oh," he said. "Oh, that is extraordinary." He played again, something more complex this time, a jig that bounced and danced through the space. The hall seemed to embrace the music, carrying it to every corner, letting it build and resonate. When he finished, the last note hung in the air for a long moment before finally fading. "Ethan," Finn said reverently, "this is the best acoustic space I have ever played in. Better than the church, better than the concert hall in the city. This is something special." Fenna's mother was looking around with an expression of dawning understanding. "You built this for my daughter?" "Yes, madam." Because someone told her, she laughed too loud. "Yes, madam." Her father stepped forward and offered his hand. Ethan shook it, the older orc's grip firm and warm. "That is either the most romantic gesture I have ever heard of or the most foolish," he said. "I am choosing to believe it is both. Welcome to the family, son." "I have not actually asked her yet," Ethan said, his face heating. "Ask me what?" Fenna demanded. Ethan turned to her. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by her family and his friend, the firelight catching in her hair. She was smiling, that huge, uncontained smile that made his chest ache. "I am broke," he said bluntly. "I have debt that will take years to pay off. I have this house and almost nothing else. I am a terrible prospect for a husband." "Is there a question coming?" Fenna asked. "Because so far this just sounds like a list of problems." "The question is whether you would consider marrying me anyway. Living here in this absurd echoing house and helping me figure out how to make it work. Hosting musicians and gatherings and whatever else we can think of to keep the bank at bay. It will not be easy. It will probably be difficult for a long time. But we will be together, and you can laugh as loud as you want, and I will build you anything else you need." "Anything else?" She was grinning now. "You have set a high bar with the custom acoustic house. I am aware." She crossed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. "Yes. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will live in this absurd, wonderful house. Yes, I will help you figure it out. Yes to all of it." She pulled him closer. "But you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to promise that you will never go behind my back and risk everything again without telling me. We are partners now. If you are going to do something ridiculous and romantic and financially devastating, I want to be part of the decision. I promise." "Good." She kissed him then, standing in the center of the echoing hall, and somewhere behind them her brother started playing something sweet and romantic on his fiddle. and the music wrapped around them like a blessing. They were married in the spring, in the great hall with the windows open and the valley spread out below. Half the town came, human and orc alike, curious to see the famous echoing house and the carpenter who had built it for love. Musicians played, and the acoustics made every note perfect. Fenna laughed during the ceremony, a huge, rolling laugh that filled every corner of the space, and no one told her it was too loud. The hall became what Fenna had envisioned. Musicians came from 3 valleys over to play in the space, and word spread further. People rented it for weddings and festivals and dances. Fenna managed the bookings with the same careful attention she had given to the orchard, and Ethan built furniture and fixtures that the renters needed. The income was not huge, but it was steady, and slowly, payment by payment, they began to chip away at the debt. Marcus was best man at the wedding, and he stood up at the reception and told everyone assembled that Ethan was the biggest fool he had ever known and also possibly the wisest, and that he hoped they would all be lucky enough to be such fools for love at least once in their lives. Fenna's mother pulled Ethan aside during the celebration and told him that she had been wrong, that a woman's laugh should never be quieted, and that she was grateful her daughter had found someone who understood that. Her father gave him a grafting knife from the orchard, a tool that had belonged to 3 generations, and told him it was for building their own family tree. They lived in the echoing house, and it was strange and wonderful and sometimes difficult. The great hall was not designed for privacy or quiet evenings, but they built a small private wing with normal-sized rooms and normal acoustics for when they wanted to be alone. They hosted gatherings twice a month, sometimes more during the festival season. Musicians and dancers and storytellers came to use the space, and the hall became known across the frontier as the place where sound lived and thrived. Ethan continued his carpentry work, building furniture now for the growing community that gathered around the hall. His reputation grew, not just for solid work, but for understanding how spaces could be shaped to serve joy. Fenna tended a small orchard on the hillside below the house, experimenting with her father's techniques, grafting and cross-breeding. She sold apples and preserves at the gatherings, and people said they were the best in 3 valleys. In the evenings, when the hall was empty and quiet, they would sit together in the gallery and talk about their day. Sometimes, Fenna would laugh at something he said, and the sound would echo back to them, and Ethan would feel that same tightness in his chest he had felt the first time he heard it, that sense of witnessing something rare and precious. The debt took 5 years to pay off completely. 5 years of careful management and hard work and occasional setbacks. But they did it together, and when the final payment was made and the land and workshop were truly theirs free and clear, they celebrated with a festival that lasted 3 days. Every musician who had ever played in the hall came back for it. The valley filled with music and laughter, and the sound of joy amplified and returned. On the last night of the festival, after the musicians had packed up and the visitors had gone home and the hall was quiet again, Ethan and Fenna stood together in the center of the space they had built. "You ever regret it?" Fenna asked quietly. "Those 5 years of debt and worry?" "The risk you took." Ethan thought about it seriously, because she deserved a serious answer. He thought about the sleepless nights and the fear and the times he had wondered if he had destroyed everything for a moment's romantic impulse. "No," he said finally. "Not even for a moment. This house, this life, all of it, it is worth everything I risked and more." She laughed, and the hall threw her joy back to them from every surface, layered and rich and perfect. They had 3 children over the next 8 years. The first was a boy they named Samuel, who came into the world wailing with such volume that even the midwife commented on his lungs. He grew into a boisterous child who loved to run through the great hall, shouting to hear his echo, playing hide and seek in the gallery. He had his mother's green skin and his father's curiosity about how things were built. The second was another boy, Ian, quieter than his brother but no less loved. He had a gift for music, and by the time he was 5 he could play a simple tune on a tin whistle. The hall's acoustics thrilled him, and he would spend hours experimenting with different sounds, figuring out how to make the echoes harmonize. The third was a girl they named Bryn, who had her mother's laugh. From the time she could make sounds, she was loud and joyful and utterly without self-consciousness. She would sit in the middle of the great hall as a toddler and babble to herself, delighted by the way her own voice came back to her. They raised their children in the echoing house and taught them that loudness was not rudeness, that joy should be expressed, that taking up space was not something to apologize for. They taught them to work hard and to build carefully, and to sometimes take risks for the things that mattered. Samuel became a builder like his father, though his interest ran more toward bridges and large structures. Ian became a musician, traveling the frontier to play in halls and taverns, though he always said nothing compared to the acoustics of home. Bryn became a teacher, and she used her loud, clear voice to fill classrooms with lessons and laughter. The echoing house became a landmark in the valley. People would direct travelers by it, saying, "Go to the house on the hill where the sound's live, then turn east." It hosted countless gatherings over the years, and the walls absorbed decades of music and laughter and celebration, until the building itself seemed to hum with remembered joy. Ethan and Fenna grew old together in that house. His hands became gnarled with arthritis, making fine carpentry difficult, but he could still design and advise. Her back ached from years of orchard work, but she could still manage the bookings and welcome the visitors. They sat together in the gallery on quiet evenings, watching the sun set over the valley, listening to the particular quality of silence in a space built for sound. One evening in late autumn, 40 years after Ethan had first heard Fenna laugh in a stuffy parlor, they sat together by the great fireplace. The hall was empty, the gathering season winding down for winter. The firelight cast familiar shadows on familiar walls. "Do you remember the betrothal viewing?" Fenna asked. "Every detail," Ethan said. "The cucumber slice on the matron's hat, your laugh, the way you tried to disappear after." "I thought my life was over," Fenna admitted. "I thought no one would ever want to marry someone who could not be a proper lady. And then you walked over and told me it was the best sound you had heard all week. It was. It still is." She leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, comfortable in the silence, comfortable with each other. "Thank you," Fenna said finally, "for building me a house where I could be loud. Thank you for filling it with sound worth echoing." Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The sound drifted through the open window and bounced gently off the vaulted ceiling, soft and wondering. Ethan thought about acoustics, and love and the strange, wonderful shapes a life could take when you built it with intention. He thought about risk and reward, and the difference between a foolish gamble and a leap of faith. He thought about laughter that was too loud for parlors, but perfect for a house built specifically to hold it. And he thought about how sometimes the most important thing you could build was not a structure of wood and stone, but a space where someone could be entirely themselves, uncontained and unashamed. The fire crackled. The owl called again. And in the echoing house on the hillside, two people who had chosen each other across all the objections and obstacles sat together in the warm silence, surrounded by walls that remembered every laugh, every song, every moment of joy they had collected over a lifetime. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.